The first time I stepped into my husband's home, I thought I was stepping into a new life, a place where hope would finally breathe inside me. But the moment the door closed behind me, something inside that house also closed, something invisible, something cold, something that warned me that I wasn't entering a home. I was stepping into a silent punishment. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat that day. It was hopeful, innocent, unaware. I smiled at everyone with trembling lips, waiting for even the smallest spark of warmth. But their eyes were the first truth I met, sharp, measuring, unwelcoming, as if I was not a bride, just an outsider who had walked into the wrong place. My mother-in-law looked at me from head to toe without blinking, and her expression said everything her lips never needed to speak. I didn't fit. I wasn't enough. I wasn't wanted. My hands were shaking, but I kept pretending everything was fine. I kept reminding myself that every new relationship takes time. But in that house, time did not soften hearts. It only taught me how to breathe without expecting kindness. By evening, the atmosphere had already begun to feel heavy, and I could sense my smile slowly dying inside me. They didn't say anything cruel directly. Their cruelty existed in silence in the way they ignored me. The way they spoke to each other, as if I wasn't standing right there. The way they walked around me as if I was invisible. That night when I walked into the bedroom, I finally allowed myself to exhale. I thought maybe my husband would understand, maybe he would notice the fear hiding behind my smile. But he didn't even look at me properly. He was busy, tired, distracted, everything except concerned. When I quietly told him my day felt overwhelming, he simply said, "You're overthinking, my family is just like this." Just like this. As if coldness was normal. As if indifference was love. As if he had already chosen which side he belonged to. And it wasn't mine. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, trying to believe that tomorrow would be different. But the truth was already carving itself into my heart. I was alone. Not because there was no one around me, but because there was no one with me. The next morning, everything became clearer. My mother-in-law handed me a long list of chores without even looking at my face. "This is how things work here," she said, her voice emotionless. Her words carried no room for questions, no space for adjustment, no consideration for the fact that I had arrived barely 12 hours ago. I nodded, quietly stepping into the role they had already decided for me. Not a bride, not a daughter-in-law, just a worker hidden behind a forced smile. Every minute felt like a test I never signed up for. If I moved too slowly, they frowned. If I moved too quickly, they whispered. If I took a moment to breathe, they stared. If I made a mistake, they sighed loudly, letting their disappointment echo through the walls. Not once did anyone ask if I needed help, if I was okay, if I was settling in. They didn't want me to settle. They wanted me to shrink, bend, adjust, and disappear into their silent rules. By afternoon, my hands were aching, but I kept going. Because that house didn't give me space to pause. Even when I stood in the kitchen trying to learn their routines, I could feel their eyes on me, watching, judging, waiting for something to criticize. My sister-in-law walked in, glanced at the way I was cooking, and snatched the spoon from my hand. "We don't do it like this," she said sharply, as if I had committed a crime. I apologized softly, but she just rolled her eyes and walked away. My apology didn't matter. My effort didn't matter. I didn't matter. Later, when I took tea to the living room, they paused their conversation the moment I entered. Not because they respected me, but because they didn't want me to hear whatever they were discussing. The way they fell silent around me made the message painfully clear. I was an unwelcome interruption in my own home. But the worst moment came in the evening. I had spent the entire day trying to prove I could handle everything, the work, the pressure, the silence. And just when I thought maybe I had done something right, my mother-in-law looked at me and said, "A girl who can't match our standards should have stayed in her father's house." The words hit me harder than any slap ever could. I felt a burn in my chest so deep it almost stole my breath. I wanted to speak. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain that I was trying my best, that I was learning, that I just needed time. But no one in that room wanted to hear my voice. So I swallowed my pain, blinked away the tears that tried to escape, and whispered, "I'll try better tomorrow." They didn't respond. No one cared. That night when I entered my room, my reflection in the mirror startled me. My eyes looked different, tired, dim, defeated. It was only my second day, yet it felt like years of weight had settled on my shoulders. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands cold, my heart trembling. All I wanted was someone to tell me I wasn't alone. But the walls remained silent, just like the people living behind them. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't just their cruelty. It was the realization that this place, this house, these people had already decided who I would be in their story. Not a loved one. Not a family member. Not a human being. Just a quiet punishment they could control. And I had no idea how much darker it was going to get. The next morning began before the sun even touched the sky. I woke up to the sharp sound of someone knocking on my door, not politely, not softly, but with a kind of authority that reminded me I wasn't allowed to rest like normal people. My mother-in-law stood outside, her arms folded, her expression carved out of stone. "Wake up," she said coldly. "In this house, the daughter-in-law starts the day before everyone else." She didn't wait for my reply. She didn't need one. In her eyes, my voice didn't matter. I stepped into the hallway, and a cold wave hit me not from the weather, but from the atmosphere of that house. Even the walls felt judgmental, as if they were waiting to catch my mistakes. I entered the kitchen quietly, trying not to make any unnecessary sound, but the moment I opened a cabinet, my sister-in-law hissed, "Why are you so loud? You'll wake everyone up." I froze. I had barely touched anything. Yet somehow, simply existing was considered wrong there. I tried to apologize, but she walked past me, brushing my shoulder as if I were dirt in her way. It stung. Not the physical touch, but the intention behind it. I swallowed the ache and turned back to the stove, trying to remember everything they had taught me yesterday. But the pressure, the fear of doing something wrong, it made my hands tremble. Each time I tried to cook exactly the way they wanted, my mind ran in circles, terrified of giving them one more reason to humiliate me. And they didn't have to wait long. When breakfast was finally served, I stood quietly to the side, hoping maybe, just maybe, they would at least acknowledge my effort. But instead, disappointment settled on every face around the table. My brother-in-law tasted the food, frowned, and placed the spoon down loudly. "Too bland." My sister-in-law looked at the bread and muttered, "She can't even knead the dough properly." And my mother-in-law, she didn't say a single word. She just stared at me with that same expressionless face, the kind that made me feel like a mistake someone regretted bringing into their life. My husband didn't defend me. He didn't even look at me. He ate silently, as if he wasn't part of this family, and as if I wasn't his wife sitting right there, trembling behind a forced smile. After breakfast, they all walked away, leaving the table full of dishes for me to clean alone. I stood there, staring at the mess, feeling my throat tighten. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Not because I was strong, but because even my tears felt unwelcome in that house. For hours, I washed, cleaned, wiped, swept, but no matter how much I did, it felt like the house swallowed all my effort and left nothing behind. By afternoon, my body felt heavy. I stepped into the small courtyard for a minute to breathe, thinking maybe a bit of sunlight would remind me that the world outside still existed. But even that moment didn't belong to me. My mother-in-law appeared behind me. "Why are you standing here doing nothing?" I just stepped out for a minute," I whispered. She narrowed her eyes. "In this house, you don't take breaks unless you finish your responsibilities, and looking at your work, you are far from finished." I nodded immediately, afraid to say anything else. She turned around and walked away, but her words stayed behind like a shadow wrapped around my neck. That evening, things changed again. I didn't expect the shift, and I didn't know it would become one of the most painful memories of my life. My husband returned home from work earlier than usual. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe he would talk to me. Maybe he would notice how exhausted I was. Maybe he would ask how my day went. But instead, the moment he walked in, my mother-in-law began complaining. Not loudly, not angrily, but in a soft, poisonous tone that I knew was designed to make him doubt me. "She can't handle anything," she whispered as if she were sharing a tragic secret. "She doesn't know how to keep a house. She's too sensitive. She's too slow. She's not used to responsibility." Each sentence stabbed deeper than the last. Each word cut into the little hope I was holding on to. My husband didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look in my direction. He simply nodded. That single nod shattered something inside me. Later, when we were alone in our room, I tried to speak. I tried to tell him I was trying my best. I tried to explain how overwhelming everything felt. But before I could finish a sentence, he cut me off. "Stop making everything emotional," he said, irritation crawling through his voice. "My family has lived this way for years. You're the one who needs to adjust. Why can't you just do things the way they expect? Why is that so difficult?" His words hit harder than all of my mother-in-law's coldness combined. Because for the first time, I realized he wasn't just ignoring my pain. He believed their version of me. He believed I was incapable, weak, flawed, a burden. I stood there, silent, feeling something inside me collapse. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way fragile things break when no one is watching. That night I cried silently, my face buried in the pillow so no one could hear. My chest hurt with every breath, but I kept trying to hold myself together. Because in that house full of people, I had no one. No support, no compassion, no safe corner to rest my tired heart. And the world outside kept living, unaware that behind those walls, I was slowly losing myself. But the worst was still ahead. The moment that would change everything. The moment when their silent cruelty would turn into something far more painful, something I was completely unprepared for. The next few days blurred together like a storm that refused to pass. Every morning began with fear, every night ended in silent tears, and the hours in between were filled with tasks that seemed designed not to keep a home running, but to break a person slowly, piece by piece. I kept telling myself, maybe things will change, maybe they'll soften, maybe they'll see I'm trying. But hope in that house was like a candle placed in a room full of wind. It never survived long. One evening, something happened that still sends chills through my chest when I remember it. It was late, around the time families usually sit together with tea, talking, laughing, sharing stories. But in my husband's house, I was not allowed to sit with them. I stood in the kitchen making their tea, listening to their voices from the living room, each laugh reminding me how far away I truly was. When I finally entered the room with the tray, their laughter stopped. Completely. As if my presence sucked the joy right out of the air. My sister-in-law raised her eyebrow at the tea and took a sip. Just a sip. Then she placed the cup down slowly, dramatically, the way someone does when they're preparing to humiliate another person. "This is too sweet," she said loudly. My brother-in-law grabbed his cup, tasted it, and grimaced. "Mine has no sugar at all." I froze. I knew I had mixed the sugar evenly. I knew I had double-checked. But they looked at me as if I had purposely ruined everything. Then my mother-in-law spoke in that calm, dangerous tone of hers. "She can't even handle basic things," she said. "How will she handle this family?" The room fell silent. Their silence wasn't empty, it was loud, heavy, suffocating. My husband looked embarrassed, but not for me. He looked embarrassed because of me. And that hurt more than the insults themselves. I apologized softly, took the tray back, and remade every cup with shaking hands. When I returned, I placed each cup carefully in front of them. No one thanked me. No one even looked at me. It was as if my effort had no value, no weight, no meaning. But that humiliation was only the beginning. Around midnight, when I finally lay down, exhausted and aching, I heard the sharp click of the room's door opening. My husband walked in, his face tense and cold. I sat up, startled. Before I could ask anything, he said, "What are you doing? Are you trying to embarrass me in front of my family?" My heart dropped. I didn't do anything intentionally. But he cut me off, his voice rising. "Then why does everything you do turn into a problem? They say you can't adjust. They say you don't listen. They say you have an attitude." Attitude. That word felt like a slap. I stared at him, stunned. When did I ever show attitude? He scoffed. "See, even now your tone sounds defensive." I looked down, trying not to break. "I'm trying my best." "You need to try harder," he snapped. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." I wanted to scream that they were the ones making me uncomfortable. I wanted to say I was drowning. I wanted to tell him that every day felt like walking through fire. But I didn't, Because the truth was becoming clearer with every passing moment, he wasn't on my side. He wasn't even willing to see my side. He walked out of the room, leaving me trembling, not just with hurt, but with a new, deeper fear. If my own husband didn't believe me, then who would? The next morning, things escalated. My mother-in-law called me into the living room. Everyone was seated, my husband, his parents, his siblings. The moment I entered, I felt like a criminal being summoned for judgment. My mother-in-law looked at me long and hard before speaking. "We have something to discuss," she said. My palms went cold. She continued, "In this house, everyone follows rules. But you are not serious about understanding this family's values." My throat tightened. "I'm trying." She raised her hand, silencing me. "Enough excuses." My sister-in-law chimed in. "You don't know how to work fast." Then her brother added, "You don't listen properly." And my father-in-law, who had barely spoken to me since I arrived, finally said, "You need to learn discipline." Discipline. As if I were a child, or worse, a servant. I stood there quietly, taking every blow without flinching. Not because I was strong, but because I knew my pain meant nothing to them. Then came the moment that changed everything. My mother-in-law leaned forward and said, "If you can't fit into this house, then maybe this house is not for you." Her words sent shockwaves through my entire body. Not because she wanted to throw me out, but because she said it so casually, like I was replaceable, removable, disposable. My husband didn't say a word, not even a whisper of disagreement, not even a flicker of concern. He sat there silently, his eyes fixed on the floor, letting their accusations fall over me like heavy stones. Something inside me shattered at that moment, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, the way fragile things break when they've already been weakened over time. I wanted to defend myself, but my voice refused to come out. I wanted to cry, but my tears betrayed me and stayed frozen inside my chest. I wanted someone, anyone, to stand up for me, but no one moved. When they finally dismissed me, I walked back to the kitchen with numb steps, feeling like my heart had been scraped raw. I tried to continue the chores, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The words echoing in my head were too heavy. "Maybe this house is not for you." I stood there, leaning against the counter, staring blankly at the wall, when something inside me whispered the truth I had been terrified to admit. This wasn't a home. This wasn't a family. This was a prison, disguised as a household. And I was the punishment they enjoyed giving. But what I didn't know then was that the darkest moment was still yet to come. A moment that would push me to my breaking point. A moment that would force me to choose between staying silent or finally standing for myself, even if no one stood with me. The days that followed were worse than I could have imagined. Each morning felt like waking up in a storm that never ended, each evening a reminder that I was trapped in a life I hadn't chosen. I tried to find moments of peace, even a breath of normalcy, but that house didn't allow it. Every step I took, every word I spoke, every action I made was watched, judged, and criticized. Slowly, painfully, I realized that no matter how much effort I put in, it would never be enough. I would never belong. One evening, after an entire day of chores and silence, my husband returned home. I had barely had a moment to rest, and I thought maybe he would notice my exhaustion. I thought maybe he would say something kind. But the moment he walked in, the atmosphere shifted again. My mother-in-law, as always, immediately began to speak, softly, but venomously. "She's doing everything wrong," she whispered, looking at him. "She doesn't understand how to manage the house. She's making things harder for all of us." He looked at me briefly, not with concern but with frustration. "Why is this still not done properly?" he asked. His voice, calm yet sharp, carried disappointment that cut deeper than any insult. I wanted to explain, to tell him how tired I was, how I was trying, how I was learning, but the words caught in my throat. There was no space for explanation. There was no space for empathy. That night I cried quietly in the corner of my room. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small, silent tears that no one could hear. Because in that house, vulnerability was a weakness and weakness was punished. I wished I could disappear, wished I could vanish from their judgmental eyes, wished I could escape the relentless scrutiny. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere to breathe freely. The following morning, I tried to wake up early and prepare breakfast before anyone else, hoping maybe a little effort could soften their criticism. But the moment I stepped into the kitchen, my sister-in-law appeared, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "You think doing things early will make us like you," she said mockingly. "You're still useless." I froze, my heart ached, but I silently continued, reminding myself that my effort was not for their approval. It was for me. I had to survive, even if they never acknowledged it. Hours passed like this, every movement under surveillance, every step judged, every word twisted into fault. And yet, I persisted. I learned the schedules, the hidden rules, the subtle expectations that were never clearly explained. I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life, hoping maybe tomorrow would be easier. But tomorrow never came. One evening, I witnessed something that left me breathless. My husband's cousin, a young girl visiting from another city, laughed at a small mistake I made while arranging plates. Just a tiny slip, a minor error. But the laughter wasn't innocent. It was sharp, deliberate, like a blade cutting into my dignity. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law joined in, giggling cruelly, and even my husband did not intervene. He did not defend me. He did not acknowledge my pain. He simply stayed silent, as if he was complicit in the humiliation. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to tell them that I had feelings, that I was human, that I deserved respect. But I didn't. I swallowed the rising anger and hurt, forcing a polite smile on my face, trying to make it look as though their laughter did not affect me. But inside, something broke. I went to my room that night and sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. The realization hit me like a hammer. No one in this house cared for me. No one would ever care for me. I was alone in a place that was meant to be family, alone in a home that was supposed to bring love. Every smile, every polite word, every tiny hope I had held onto was a lie, a shadow I had clung to, thinking it was real. Then came the next day, the day that made me feel completely trapped. My mother-in-law assigned me a list of tasks longer than I had ever imagined. She did not speak. She simply handed me the paper, eyes cold, lips pressed in a line of judgment. I tried to complete everything perfectly, every action precise, every movement careful. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. Plates left streaks, clothes weren't folded perfectly, floors weren't shiny enough. The effort didn't matter. My presence didn't matter. I didn't matter. My husband came home late that evening. I thought maybe this time, maybe just for a moment, he would see me struggling. But he didn't. He didn't even ask. Instead, he glanced at me briefly, sighed, and went to sit with his family. Not a word, not a gesture of care, not even a glance to show he noticed I had worked from sunrise to sunset. That night, lying awake on the bed, I felt a cold emptiness creep into my chest. The realization that I was invisible, that my pain was unseen, that my effort was meaningless, hit me harder than any words could. The house was not just unkind. It was designed to break me. Every glance, every whisper, every small act of disregard was a calculated part of their control. And in that darkness, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive. I would endure. I would not allow their cruelty to destroy me completely. But deep down, I wondered, how long could one heart hold so much sorrow before it shatters? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew the coming days would test me more than I had ever been tested before. The house had not finished with me. Not by a long shot. The morning of the 5th week in that house felt heavier than any day before. I woke up with a strange pressure in my chest, not from fear this time, but from something far more unsettling, numbness. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even hopping for change. I was simply empty. As if every tear, every heartbreak, every humiliation had carved out a part of me until there was barely anything left to feel. But the world around me didn't slow down. The cruelty didn't pause. The routine of pain didn't break. I made breakfast, cleaned the house, folded the clothes, washed dishes, all without a single word spoken to me. It was as though I had become part of the furniture, useful, functional, silent. My existence served their convenience. My presence served their dominance. And the strangest part was I didn't fight it that morning. I moved like someone whose soul had been quietened, someone who had been taught that resistance was pointless. But that quietness didn't last long. Around noon, something happened that shook me harder than anything they had ever done before. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard raised voices coming from the living room. At first, I ignored them. Arguments were normal in that house, especially when I became an easy target to blame for their frustrations. But then I heard my name, and my body froze. "She doesn't deserve anything," my sister-in-law said, her tone dripping with bitterness. "She can't even take care of basic responsibilities," added her mother. "She should be grateful we allow her to stay here," someone else muttered. I stood still, a bowl in my hand, heart beating too fast, knowing the storm was gathering again. But then, unexpectedly, my father-in-law spoke, and what he said made my entire body go cold. Why did we bring her here if she can't give us anything in return? Give them what? What exactly was I supposed to give them? His tone wasn't angry. It was practical, calculated, as if he was talking about an object, not a human, not someone's daughter, not someone's wife, just a thing they had acquired and found no use for. My legs felt weak. And then, my husband's voice entered the conversation. "She's not good at anything yet," he said, almost casually, "but maybe she'll learn. Maybe she'll learn. Not she is learning. Not she's trying. Just an impatient, careless judgment from the one person I had hoped might defend me." I leaned against the counter, feeling my vision blur for a moment. My throat tightened, but I willed the tears not to come. Not here, not now, not where they could see the effect they had on me. I forced myself to finish cooking, place the dishes on the table, and stepped back quietly as they began eating, their voices loud and cheerful now, as if tearing me down had refreshed them. Hours later, just when I thought the worst of that day was over, the real blow came. I had gone to my room to fold some clothes when I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn around, my mother-in-law slammed the door shut and stood there staring at me with cold, sharp eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked. I blinked, confused. "I am folding clothes." She stepped closer, her voice low but razor sharp. "Don't pretend to be innocent. I know what you're trying to do." My heart dropped. "I'm not trying to do anything." "Enough," she snapped. "Do you think we don't see your games? You want sympathy. You want us to treat you softly. But let me tell you clearly, that will never happen. You are here to serve this house, not to seek attention." I felt a sting in my chest. "I'm not seeking attention, I'm just—" She cut me off again. "You think crying in your room at night is hidden from us. You think we don't hear? Stop playing the victim. No one in this family will fall for your tricks." Her words hit me harder than a slap. I whispered, "I'm not playing anything, I'm just tired." "Then get used to being tired," she replied with ruthless calm. "Every woman gets tired. You are not special. And if you ever think of leaving this house or complaining to your parents, remember, we will say things about you they will never forget." My breath caught. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a threat. She leaned in closer, her face inches from mine. "In this house, you speak when we allow it. You rest when we allow it. You breathe peace only when we allow it." For the first time since I arrived, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not rebelliously, but quietly, deeply. A silent shift of realization. I wasn't just unloved here. I was owned. She finally stepped back, satisfied with the fear she saw in my eyes, and walked out, slamming the door behind her, so hard it echoed in my bones. For a long time, I sat there on the floor, breath shallow, heart pounding. I stared at the doorway, imagining myself running out of it, leaving everything behind. But I didn't move. My body felt paralyzed, as if invisible chains held me in place. Hours passed. Dinner came and went. The house quieted down. I remained seated on the cold floor, staring at nothing, the weight of her words crushing me from inside. Late that night, my husband entered the room. He didn't ask where I had been. He didn't notice my swollen eyes. He simply removed his shoes, glanced at me briefly, and said, Don't make things harder, just do what they say. Just do what they say. That was his entire advice. Something inside me cracked again, a little louder this time, a little deeper, a little closer to breaking completely. After he fell asleep, I stood by the window, looking outside at the quiet street, at the sky, at the world that existed beyond these suffocating walls. I wondered if anyone out there knew what I was enduring, if anyone would ever know, if anyone would ever care. The night air felt different, not cold, not warm, just honest. Outside, life seemed normal. Inside, I was fatting. And for the first time, I whispered to myself something I had never dared to admit before. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this house was never meant to be my home. Maybe staying silent is killing me slowly. But even as that truth formed inside me, I knew something even darker was waiting ahead. Something that would push me past the limits of silence, past the limits of endurance. Because the day was coming, very soon, when their cruelty wouldn't just break my heart. It would force me to make a choice that would change everything. I had spent so long swallowing my pain that my heart no longer remembered how to beat without fear. But that night, after everything I had endured, after every insult, every silent wound, something inside me finally shifted. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't rebellion. It was simply the realization that my life had value, even if no one in that house wanted to see it. Still, the weight of their cruelty clung to me like a shadow that refused to leave. When I woke up before dawn, the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it is holding its breath. I stepped out of my room slowly, almost afraid the floor would creak and accuse me of existing at the wrong time. Every morning, they reminded me of how unwelcome I was, and today, I felt the heaviness even before the first word was spoken. I walked toward the kitchen, hopping for just a moment of peace before the storm. But peace was something that never belonged to me in that house. As I entered the kitchen, my mother-in-law turned toward me slowly, her expression already carrying an accusation she hadn't even spoken yet. "You think waking up early makes you a good daughter-in-law," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through my skin. I didn't answer. I had learned that my silence bothered her more than my words, but even silence felt dangerous now. She moved closer, her chin lifted, her eyes scanning me as if she was checking for flaws that she hoped to find. "You breathe too softly," she scoffed. "You walk too lightly. Everything about you feels insincere." Her words hit me like stones, but I kept standing, even though my heart trembled. Then she added, "Girls like you come into a home to destroy it." I wanted to speak, just once, to defend myself, to say that the only thing I had destroyed was my own spirit trying to please them. But I swallowed the truth again, because in that house, truth was a luxury I was never allowed to afford. When my husband entered the room, I turned to him instinctively, hopping for even a flicker of support. But he didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge the tension. He simply sat down, scrolling through his phone, while his mother's bitterness dripped onto the floor between us. I wondered how he didn't hear it, how he didn't feel the heaviness choking the room, but perhaps he had learned to ignore pain that wasn't his. "You haven't served tea yet," his mother said sharply. I hurried toward the stove, trying to avoid another attack, but she followed me with her words. "If you can't even manage a simple morning, then what are you doing in this house? We should have chosen a girl who actually knew how to be a wife." I felt the air inside me collapse. Not once had she asked what hurt me. Not once had she wondered whether I had eaten, slept, or even breathed without fear. Yet here she was, judging my entire existence based on the speed at which I made tea. When I placed the tray in front of them, my husband didn't even look up. Not even a glance. Not even a moment. His silence hurt more than her loud cruelty. At least she acknowledged my presence. He acted like I didn't exist at all. After breakfast, the chores began. The endless cycle of cleaning things that were already clean, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, washing dishes that no one had used. They called it responsibility, but I knew it was punishment dressed in the clothing of tradition. I had once believed marriage meant building a home together. I didn't know it could also mean losing the home inside yourself. As I bent down to scrub the floor again, the door behind me opened. My sister-in-law walked in with a smirk that carried more venom than any insult. "You missed a spot," she said casually, tapping the tiles with her slipper. Maybe if you tried harder, you wouldn't be such a disappointment. I looked up at her, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something rising inside me. Not hatred, not revenge, just the quiet awareness that I didn't deserve this. Before I could say anything, she placed her slipper right on the clean tile and pressed down firmly. Now clean it again. I lowered my head and wiped the floor once more. Not because I accepted their treatment, but because I was too tired to fight when I had no strength left. The day dragged on like a storm without thunder, heavy, suffocating, and endless. And then, in the afternoon, something happened that changed everything. I was in my room folding laundry when I heard it. My name, spoken in a whisper, but filled with urgency. It was the voice of the neighbor's elderly woman, someone who had watched silently from afar as my life slowly crumbled. She stood near the open window and said softly, "Child, why do you let them break you like this?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever noticed my pain as something real, something heavy, something undeserved. I walked toward the window quietly. She leaned forward, her eyes filled with a kind of kindness I had forgotten existed. "You are not a servant," she said. "You are someone's daughter, someone who once laughed freely. Don't let them turn you into a shadow." Her words slid into my heart like light into a dark room. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But for the first time in months, someone had seen me. That night, when the house slept and the darkness wrapped around me like a fragile blanket, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the moonlight spilling across the floor. And I realized something I had never dared to accept. If I didn't save myself, no one in this world ever would. The pain was real. The silence was real. But the strength that had been quietly growing inside me, that was real too. And soon, very soon, I would have to choose whether to keep surviving their cruelty or finally step into the life I still hoped was waiting for me. Because I was done being a silent punishment in their home. I deserved to be human again. I had always believed that a person breaks only once, at a single moment when life becomes too heavy to carry. But I learned something far more painful. A person breaks slowly, silently, piece by piece, until one day they look in the mirror and cannot recognize the face staring back. That night, sitting alone in that cold room, watching the moonlight tremble on the wall, I realized I had already broken 1,000 times. Yet somehow I was still here, still breathing. Still hopping for a life where I didn't have to apologize for existing. The next morning began like every other, but something inside me felt different. My steps were quiet, my hands were steady, but my heart, it carried a firmness I hadn't felt before. When I entered the kitchen, the same harsh silence greeted me. My mother-in-law was standing there, arms folded, eyes sharp with suspicion, as if she sensed that something inside me had shifted overnight. "You're late," she said, even though I was. I didn't argue. I no longer felt the need to defend myself against lies. I simply moved toward the stove and began preparing breakfast. But she wasn't used to my silence, not this kind of silence, not the silence of someone who was slowly gathering strength. "What happened to you?" she asked with a frown. I didn't answer. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of her. I was just tired of giving her emotions she never deserved. My husband walked in next, rubbing his eyes as if the world owed him comfort. He sat at the table, glancing at me briefly before looking away. That one glance felt like all the years of our marriage summed up into a single moment. He saw me only when it was easy, ignored me when it mattered, and abandoned me when I needed him most. As I served the tea, he muttered, "Don't spill it this time." His tone wasn't harsh, but it was empty, emptier than any insult I had ever heard. An empty heart hurts more than angry words, but today, something inside me refused to bleed. After breakfast, they handed me a list of chores long enough to fill the entire day. My sister-in-law smirked as she walked past me, tossing a pile of clothes onto the floor intentionally. "Clean these. They smell like neglect," she said, her voice dripping with the sweetness of cruelty. I bent down to pick them up, but as I touched the first cloth, I suddenly stopped. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because I no longer wanted to live a life where my worth was measured by how silently I obeyed others. I stood up slowly. For the first time, my back felt straight, not bent under fear, not curved under pressure, but upright with the quiet dignity I thought I had lost. My sister-in-law noticed. "Why are you standing like that?" she snapped. I didn't answer her either. I walked past her, through the hallway, and toward my room. My legs trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of a decision that had taken me months to reach. I closed the door behind me and looked around the small space that had felt like a prison for so long. But today, it felt like a place where a chapter was ending. I opened the cupboard and pulled out the small bag I used to bring my belongings when I first came into this house. It still smelled like home, my real home, the one I had left behind for a life I thought would give me love. Instead, it had given me wounds I didn't deserve. As I began packing, my hands shook, not because I was scared, but because I was finally choosing myself. Halfway through packing, I heard footsteps outside my door. My husband walked in without knocking. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the bag. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Leaving," I said softly. He blinked, shocked, not because he cared, but because he never imagined I would have the courage to say it. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Anywhere is better than staying where I'm not treated as a human." He scoffed. "So you think you can just walk out? What will people say? What will my family say?" I looked him in the eyes, truly looked for the first time in years. "For once, I don't care what your family says. I care what my soul is begging me to do." His jaw tightened, but he didn't stop me. Maybe he realized that he had lost the right to hold me back. Maybe he knew that love can't survive in a home where respect never existed. When I walked into the living room with my bag, my mother-in-law turned pale with shock. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. "I'm leaving," I said. "Not because I'm weak, but because I finally understand that staying here is destroying the person I was meant to be." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak another cruel word, I continued. "I came into this house with hope. You turned that hope into punishment, but I refuse to let you turn the rest of my life into a sentence." The entire room fell silent. For the first time, my silence wasn't weakness. It was power. I stepped outside the house, and the sunlight hit my face softly, like a promise that life still had gentle things left for me. I took my first step onto the road with a heart that was bruised, but not broken. A heart that had finally found its voice. As I walked away, I realized something important. Some homes are built to shelter you, but some homes are built to bury you. And walking away from the wrong one is the most courageous step a person can take. I didn't know what waited for me next. I didn't know how I would rebuild myself. But I knew this. I was done being a silent punishment in someone else's story. From now on, I would write my own. If my story touched your heart, please support my channel for more powerful stories.